and good morning to everybody attending today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. One of the things that we've been doing here at StorageCraft is really changing the way people can think about storage management and data protection, and really looking at, as the title says here, a breakthrough for backup recovery. Because for the last 20-plus years that I've been in the storage space, looking at ways to solve the problem, one of the common themes continues to be, how do I solve my backup recovery? How do I recover applications more quickly, protect an unknown amount of data that's going to grow at an unknown rate over N number of years? And really, how do you solve that problem? And so at StorageCraft, we've really reimagined how to solve that problem, because the typical way to do that is with legacy scale-up RAID solutions, right? You choose, as an IT administrator, and as you're working with your customers, you're looking at, okay, how big are the customers going to protect applications over 12 months, 24, 36 months? Trying to figure out from a guesstimate on how fast their business is going to grow, data retention requirements, do they need a small, medium, or large version of a typical active RAID controller? And then at some point, you decide on the size of that, and you look at how you can scale that over time. But in reality, what it results in is storage that is underutilized at the beginning of the deployment, and at some point it's right-sized and ultimately undersized, where you can't scale up performance and or capacity as needed, or you're going to retire that hardware when it reaches end of useful life and you're faced with a forklift upgrade. All those scenarios aren't good, and they're either a waste or an underutilization of capital assets. So what we've done at StorageCraft is really eliminated the guesswork and allow you to deploy storage for your customers and sell a solution that scales over time based upon their dynamic and changing business needs. It gives you the ability to size the backup infrastructure to what the customers need at the beginning, and you can exactly provision the resources and start with as little as a single node in the cluster, a handful of terabytes, but then also scale out over time by dynamically and non-disruptively adding either drives to an existing node in the cluster or multiple nodes to the cluster, and scaling that from a few terabytes to hundreds of terabytes. And this is really different than the way most customers are used to doing things, and it's not the way the typical RAID and LUN-based solutions are working. There's no need to think about thin provisioning or downtime and applications that can only see a certain size volume. And the reason is because of our architecture. OneBlock has an architecture that is not like the typical RAID or LUN-based solutions that have a block store, right? Everybody in the call is familiar with typical fiber channel or iSCSI solutions and even network-attached storage solutions that have file system access to block stores, right? You create a volume and a LUN out of multiple drives in a RAID group, 4 plus 2, 5 plus 1, 10 plus 2, whatever the ratio is that you use. That actually leads to a fixed configuration of that information on that specific drive over a period of time, right? And that's the way that's been done for more than 30 years, but that's not the way it's going to solve the problems going forward. The way you're going to solve the storage problems going forward is really with an object store. An object store is what all of the web scale companies, Amazon, Google, etc., use, because it's not using a typical block store. It's actually an object that's stored on a drive. And what that means is that drive and those objects are dynamic, and those objects can be moved anywhere in the cluster. And the cluster can be a small cluster. It can be multiple petabytes in size. It just depends upon the implementation. And so the benefits of object storage have been there for a long time. This is not a new technology. New approach to storage has been in the works for more than 10 years. The difference is that what StorageCraft has done is we're delivering OneBlock in a complete solution that gives you the benefits of object storage, the ability to grow non-disruptively, the ability to take advantage of some additional software features I'll get to in a moment. But what it looks like to your applications and to your backup recovery environment is scale-out network-attached storage. So it looks like SMB and NFS file services to applications, but underneath the covers, it's much more complicated than that. And when I say complicated, not complicated to the application, but our intellectual property and infrastructure is giving you all the benefits of the object store, but the simplicity and ease of use of network attached storage. So when you look at how and what this looks like from a one step lower, we've written our own distributed object store. Now, this is a little bit of detail in terms of our architecture, not because you need to communicate this to all of your customers as you're looking at selling the solution or looking to solve the problem, but rather really to understand the benefits of what we're delivering is really based upon this architecture. It's based upon our intellectual property of writing our own distributed object store. The ability to have microservices. Today these are file system services, SFME and NFS file services. These microservices are going to be expanded into other protocols and other services that will provide additional flexibility simply through a software upgrade. And these microservices, currently SMB and NFS, when you look at writing files into the cluster from an application perspective, it just looks like an NFS export. It just looks like a file share for home directories, or it looks like a backup target for Shadow Protect or Veeam. But in reality, behind the scenes, those files are being decomposed, deduplicated, compressed, and converted into an object that can be moved anywhere in the cluster. And I mention that because this value of our architecture of the object store lends itself to protection against multiple fault domains, multiple failure domains. So when you're looking at protecting your data, certainly backing it up is obviously critical and having that stored properly, but then also what happens in the event of hardware failures. Certainly from the primary storage, there have to be protections against that, but as a secondary storage target, you also have to be concerned about drive failures and node failures and even multiple site failures if you're going to look at disaster recovery as well. And so because we actually have our object store architecture, this allows you to start, as I mentioned earlier, with as little as a single node in the cluster. And as we create multiple copies of the object to protect against drive failures, we intelligently, and again, intelligently do this without any administrator action on the user side, protect against drive failures, and we'll spread those objects across the right number of drives in a single node or across multiple nodes in a cluster to even protect against multiple node failures in a cluster, to lose 12 or 24 drives in a cluster, but still have access to the data and have everything protected. So as you scale out over time and grow, there's no action needed, no downtime needed, not only to add the clusters and expand that capacity, but then the fault domains automatically expand and protect the information to the greatest possible extent based upon drives in a node, node in a cluster, and then multiple clusters across multiple locations via remote replication. So it's a very flexible architecture that really sets the stage for a lot of things that we've been reimagining from the beginning of setting up and installing the one blocks is literally less than a 15-minute process. It's 2 mouse clicks and you're done. This is a different way about thinking about solving the storage problem, and it's also something that we've really thought about from a management perspective. Our goal as StorageCraft is really to give administrators back as much time as possible, or if you're a partner that manages storage and backups for your 20 or 50 or 100 customers, to give you the ability to spend as little time possible managing the storage and as much time selling and providing other services to your customer. And that's really what OneSystem is. OneSystem is our cloud-based management service. This is a multi-tenant architecture that allows you to manage, if you're in a single organization across multiple sites, if you have multiple data centers, you can manage all of your clusters from a single web console, right? A single web page. From any browser in any location, you have access to all of the storage to not only do active management, but also reporting and monitoring. If you're a partner that is responsible for managing storage or backups for multiple customers, you can have that multi-tenant architecture where your one account is able to manage your 10 different customers, but each of your 10 customers only sees their storage, provided you give them access to do that and manage it. But it's something that allows you to remove the barriers of having to install anything on site and maintain it, and it's a cloud-based multi-tenant architecture that gives you that visibility and control that you need. As well as, and I know this is going to sound difficult for a lot of the Unix and long-time storage admins, there are no command line operations that are needed. Everything is web-based. Everything is point-click simple, to the point of even doing replication, setting up replication with 3 mouse clicks. Right? So it's a different way about thinking about How are you going to simply manage storage, but yet have the powerful capabilities to provide different storage policies for different shares in the cluster based upon the use? We also have the ability, since this is a cloud-based management service, for StorageCraft to proactively monitor every storage deployment that we have. So on a 7x24 basis, we're continually seeing and understanding the environment and that OneBlox is in. I understand the state of every power supply and disk drive that's deployed across all of our customers worldwide. But it allows also customers to be able to enable remote access for our support organization to remedy any problems that occurs. It's something that customers can turn on and off as they would like, but it's something that allows the advanced configurations that they might need to have from a security policy be enforced or enable StorageCraft support organization for us to remotely access that. Additionally, customers have the ability for lights out management through IPMI and so forth. So even if they're going to do things on their own, they have that ability to take advantage of our cloud-based management service and that global visibility. So from an architecture perspective, we've obviously done things very differently. We've spent a lot of engineering time. We have dozens of patents right now around our technology, but it really is about simplicity for you and your customers. When you look at the different hardware options and you look at how are you going to change and solve the backup recovery problem or even primary storage, it's really with two different models. So we have a 4312 model, which is our hard drive-based model. And the thing to think about as we talk about and share some of these software features, our software runs the same on all of our OneBlox models. The only difference is how fast it's going to run. So the capabilities of the scale-out storage I spoke about before, as well as our ability to do inline deduplication and compression. We do either variable length deduplication or fixed length, depending upon the use and the type of application. You can select that on a per-share basis. We're also taking snapshots continuously of the file system and the data. There is no scheduling necessary, but every 90 seconds we're taking a snapshot of that unstructured data or even structured data that's stored on us. And that's available for recovery. We also enable encryption at rest, but also remote replication for disaster recovery. So whether you're a healthcare organization or you have sensitive information that you need to do encryption at rest, we enable that to be done through a simple web interface. Again, couple of radio mouse button, choose the secure passphrase, and you're done. And everything in that cluster is encrypted. So when a drive fails, you can return that drive, you can RMA that drive, and none of that information can be read outside of the OneBlox cluster. We've also changed the thinking about the economics of this in that we allow customers to bring their own drives. So whether you're providing drives for your customers, or whether you're going to let customers buy their own drives, they can bring any drive from 1 to 8 terabyte drive and use it in the system. You can mix and match drives over time. As you grow and have the OneBlox models from today over 2 and 3 and 4 years, depending upon the life, you can use the next generation hardware models to be heterogeneously clustered with what you're using today. Different drive capacities can be used in those newer models, and that allows you to mix and match nodes within a cluster over time. And all the while, there's no forklift upgrade at the end of it. You can simply evacuate an old OneBlox if you're ready to retire after 3 or 5 years of use, and those objects, all of the data, is migrated to the other nodes in the cluster, and the application doesn't know anything has changed, but you've just refreshed your hardware. This is also something that allows, from a simple networking perspective, everything is Ethernet based. So the 4312 has 2 10 gig Ethernet ports as well as 2 1 gig Ethernet ports. We allow multi-network profiles for different subnets and different application access, but also from a clustering perspective, there's no complexity when setting up a 5 or a 7 node cluster in the environment. Everything is just via Ethernet. There's no dedicated InfiniBand switches or complex networking. You have the ability to choose different bond modes as well as whether you want to do LACP or whether you want to do jumbo frames. You can choose to do that on the different network profiles, but it's very intuitive and very straightforward to set up and use. And I mentioned that the same software that runs on our 4312 also runs on our all-flash. And so the 5210 model is this the same scale-out software architecture we've been discussing, but now it's a different form factor. It's a 1U appliance. This 1U has the same 2.5-inch SSD options. You can bring your own solid-state drives, and we support a select types and models of between Samsung and Intel that you can choose from. There's different models between TLC and MLC, depending upon what those workloads are, and that is actually something that, again, from a pricing perspective, when you're looking at, and everybody on the call obviously sells, knows the price of flash from a lot of the legacy storage vendors. Getting a 3.8 terabyte SSD at about $2,000 is very refreshing for most customers, as opposed to paying $8,000 to $10,000 from a lot of the storage vendors that are selling them directly, and they add their markup but add no value to an SSD. Right? All of StorageCraft's value is in our software, and that's where we make it very easy to sell and transact, which allows us to keep the pricing low. When you're buying either SSDs or hard drives at retail pricing, that's sometimes 50% the cost of the total solution. So when you're looking at this from a backup recovery perspective, customers have been able to use all flash 5210 solutions in places where they have not been able to before when they're looking at all flash from other vendors because of these price points. If you look at a 20 cents per gig per year, that's an extremely low cost for all flash. Now, you could still reduce the cost and go with a hard drive-based solution, and then you're looking at, with the 4212, you're actually looking at less than 2 cents per gig per month, right? So this is actually Amazon S3 pricing. The all-flash 5210 solution is going to be more expensive, but it's also going to change the way you can think about providing data protection services. As we're looking at the two different options and two different models between the 4312 and the 5210, there are a number of use cases and opportunities to look at. We mentioned at the beginning that really changing the way you think about data protection is what StorageCraft has been focusing on, and that's the first item here. Is that you can now have the benefits of being and providing secondary storage, but with primary storage performance. So we're certified with Veeam and Backup Exec from Veritas and NetBackup and Commvault, and clearly our own Shadow Protect solution that tens of thousands of partners use today. But this is where you have the opportunity to choose an approach. Is it a hard drive-based solution for price and performance, or do you need to now change the game and provide an all-flash solution where you're looking at continue the operation from a continual operation perspective, scaling out over time. And as that backup infrastructure grows year over year, as you add more applications, you can simply scale out and you never have to reconfigure your backup jobs, right? That Shadow Protect target or the Veeam data repository, that simply just sees twice as much storage, no reconfiguration to your jobs. But now with the opportunity to use flash where you haven't been able to afford to before, we have customers recovering VMs in less than 2 minutes with Shadow Protect and our virtual boot capability. Now in this presentation, I'm going to focus really on the storage side and not as much on the software side for our backup recovery capabilities. There's a number of other webinars that focus on that. Here I'm focusing more on the storage target side. So the other thing to think about, and this is what we basically have with either virtual boot with Shadow Protect, or for those partners that are working with Veeam, instant recovery, you can recover VMs essentially faster than you can log into them with your Windows credentials. So regardless of the size of the virtual machine, with Shadow Protect and Virtual Boot, you can now run your VMs on the all-flash 5210 in a recovery mode, and now you're looking at similar performance results as your primary storage, but now it's a secondary target. The other thing to think about is that from a disaster recovery perspective, you can eliminate tape rotation, right? With our architecture, because we're object-based, you don't have to worry about having like-size configurations in the primary and the secondary location. You don't have to worry about having the same type of storage, hard drive-based versus all-flash. As you see here in the diagram, San Francisco is an all-flash cluster, right? And you can have shares that you can decide to replicate to another location. Here you've got engineering and Veeam in San Francisco being read-write replicating to New York as read-only. At the same time, you have VMware, which is in the New York cluster, again, that's a 4v12 cluster, replicating back to San Francisco as read-only. So you can do bidirectional replication. You can do a many-to-many or a many-to-one. So depending upon how many data centers you as a customer have, or as a partner identifying the solution for your customers, you have that flexibility to decide how you're going to protect against local failure protection, but then also remote failure protection. You don't have to worry about the difference between how many and what LUNs are set up in the primary and secondary. The only thing to think about is really what the capacity is in each of the clusters. As long as you have the capacity, you can replicate it, which is what you see in the diagram here, where you've got a 5-node cluster replicating to a 7-node cluster. You have all flash going to hard drive based 4v12 solutions. At the same time, when you're looking at shadow protect and one blocks, you have that protection locally to recover. You can certainly replicate that to another one blocks cluster, but we also afford the opportunity to recover the application in our cloud, and that's where we have the opportunity to provide disaster recovery as a service. So now you can recover your applications in our cloud, run them in our cloud, and provide secure networking services back to your users and applications on premises. And so you have really a variety of ways to protect against your storage on premises, replicate to another one blocks, or in our cloud. The other thing to think about when looking at data protection overall is our ability to protect against virtual servers and virtual machines. So with Shadow Protect, we certainly work with and protect applications running in VMware, but you also have the opportunity from a primary storage workload to use the all-flash 5210 or even the 4v12, depending upon the size of the deployment and the performance requirements. Both of these are VMware ready. And because of our architecture, those NFS data stores for VMware have no capacity restrictions. You can create a 64 terabyte NFS export if you want to, but from our perspective, there's no creation or sizing of anything that goes to a particular NFS export or SMB share. It can be any size. Now in this case, VMware has a 64 terabyte limit, but that also gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the size of the files that you're writing. We don't have any limitation like a traditional journal-based file system. You don't have to worry about thin provisioning. You can worry about simply selling and having your customer use a solution that allows them to scale it over time. And when they grow from 10 terabytes to 300 terabytes, that NFS data store or those 3 or 4 data stores, depending on how many they create, VMware simply sees more application capacity and storage capacity, which consequently the applications running in virtual machines see more storage capacity. There's no application downtime to do that, which leads to a different opportunity, particularly around virtual desktops. Right? You can now have the opportunity to use our all-flash solution as primary storage for your VDI infrastructure, for either the hosting the boot volumes and or all the file serving data. We have the opportunity, because of our architecture, to replicate from all-flash to hard drive based off-site. We have customers doing this today where they actually use a combination of primary storage for all-flash. In this case, in this example, it's actually a Pure storage. And they have 7 terabytes of boot volumes they have about 400 engineering workers, right? And that's a great solution. Pure is a very good solution, very high performing. But for their 700 terabytes of file serving data for all their users, there's no way you're going to put that on a Pure all-flash solution, right? Which is where they use the one blocks. And then they actually replicate that off-site. So they're doing the protection of all the information locally, but then they replicate that off-site for disaster recovery. So one of the things that we've been really working on here at StorageCraft is how do you think about protecting information not only as a secondary target with Shadow Protect or Veeam or NetBackup, but also how do you protect the unstructured data if we're being used for primary storage? And that's where, based upon our architecture, in a cluster that you can define multiple shares, NFS or SMB, they can be used in different ways. So if it's primary storage for file serving, for archiving, as an image repository, digital asset management repository, all that unstructured data that can be stored on the 4v12 or even the 5210 for that matter if you have high performance file serving needs, we're taking those continuous snapshots. Right? Those continuous snapshots are protecting that file system and all of the user data every 90 seconds. And you can define, based upon the type of application, what that storage policy is for a given share. Do you want to use variable length or fixed length inline deduplication? Are you sending images to the cluster that's not going to benefit from any compression. Go ahead and turn it off. Save some of the CPU cycles. How long do you want to keep those snapshots? There's no settings for how frequently the snapshots are taken. We're going to take them every 90 seconds. The only question is for that share, what is the retention period for that application? Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it forever? You have that flexibility on a per share basis to make these decisions and then decide, am I going to replicate this to another location, to another one-box cluster or not? So as you look at different application uses for primary and secondary storage, you now have a cluster that serves both purposes but really changes the way you're thinking about the backup recovery infrastructure, because in the case of storing primary unstructured data in our cluster, you don't actually have to back it up anymore. All the information is protected via snapshots. All of those snapshots are immutable. They're immutable because of our object store solution underneath the covers. Right? From a user perspective, they cannot delete any snapshots. Even administrators, one system administrators cannot delete snapshots. They're immutable. You can delete an entire share. There's a two-factor authentication process for strong protection against doing that. But an admin can't go in and delete John's snapshot from 3 days ago. Right? It's immutable. You can change the retention period about how long you like to keep it, because we take snapshots every 90 seconds and keep that for the first hour. We do hourly for the first day, daily for the first week, and then weekly for the next 3 years. Right? We also integrate clearly with Active Directory, but from a SMB perspective, one of the things that unfortunately, a number of our customers have been infected with is ransomware. And unfortunately, they've been able to recover everything from our snapshots after the infection with ransomware. If you want to look at providing capacity limitations to those SMB shares for like home directories or NFS exports, you can set those quotas, because every share has equal access to the entire storage pool. And you can think about that, just that pool of capacity. But if you want to have a home directory, instead of seeing 500 terabytes, they can see 10. You can set that through your Active Directory and just your Windows file serving permissions. Right? You can also set up access-based enumeration. If you have customers that want to limit what their users see from a snapshot perspective, to be able to do right mouse click or Windows previous version, you can do that. They can submit a trouble ticket, and an IT department can actually go in. So you can set very granular file and folder-based permissions for not only access control, but also access-based enumeration. And so when you look at this from a ransomware perspective, this is one of the things I mentioned that unfortunately some of our customers have been infected with, and we're not going to prevent an infection from ransomware, but what we are going to be able to do is go back to a previous snapshot prior to that infection. So you're going to have two versions of every file, all the clean files and then all the encrypted files with ransomware. We've had hospitals, Christopher Rural Health in the Midwest here in the United States, they actually were infected, and the CIO, not the CIO, the CTO, excuse me, he was very nervous, obviously, because of patient records and health records there, but he was able to get everything back and recover all the data immediately. This is also something that is very granular. So unlike LUN or volume-based snapshots, where you have to revert the entire volume oftentimes back to that point in time, with our snapshots, everything is file-based. And everything ultimately is at the object level, so we don't actually consume any additional capacity with the snapshots. All those snapshots are actually deduplicated against the primary storage. However, you have that flexibility to recover an individual file, individual folder, or if you need to do the entire share, you can certainly do that as well. So it is flexible in terms of what type of information and how much information you need to recover from the snapshots. So there are a couple questions that have been coming in. Let me kind of catch up on those a little bit. One of the questions is, are you going to be supporting larger drives than 8 terabytes? And yeah, the answer for the hard drive based model, we are going to be supporting larger drives of some of the next generation models of one block. As I mentioned, over time, you can heterogeneously cluster different versions of the hardware, because really all of our software runs the same on each of the one blocks. You'll be able to cluster hard drive based 40-12 models with future generations. And similarly with our all flash model, the same thing is true. There's a question here about hybrid. Do you have all flash and hard drive mix? I see what the person's asking. So our architecture is an all-flash or all HDD. We don't have a hybrid model like a typical dual controller where you have some amount of cache that's on the SSD and then the rest is written out to the drive. We do have SSDs in the 4212, but that's really for accelerating our object index lookup, but it's not for user data, so it's not like a tiered hybrid flash and HDD solution. So it is a all-flash or all HDD solution. Okay. Question here on disaster recovery. They're looking at multiple data centers. Can you replicate to multiple data centers from the same cluster? So yes. So for this, we do support the many-to-many or one-to-many, depending upon what you're looking at. So a single cluster can replicate to up to 9 other clusters, again, on a per-share basis. And that can be bidirectional or in a many-to-many or one-to-many architecture. But up to the primary cluster can replicate to up to 9 target clusters. Okay. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to share with everybody, and particularly for the partners out there, we are looking, and we do promotions from time to time. And so with this Channel Pro, we are offering free storage with the purchase of each OneBlocks. So depending upon the model, if you have an all-flash storage need or a hard drive-based storage need, you can have 32 terabytes of free hard drive storage. These are actually 8 terabyte drives when you purchase a 4212, or alternatively for the all-flash, we're actually giving away 7.6 terabytes of flash with that. And so these would be 2 3.8 terabyte SSDs. And the link here in the presentation that is available, that Michael will make available afterwards, is the link to that promotion. You'll see other things as well as far as AdWords and so forth for this promotion. But this is a limited time offer, and so feel free to take advantage of that. So with that, I think, let me see if there are any other questions that have come in that I missed. No, I think that covers everything. There's one question here that's a little complicated. It's a little bit more than just for the audience here, so I'll follow up with that person directly and be able to answer that. So with that, Michael, I will turn it back over to you.
Hey, that's great, Sean. A lot of great information. Thanks for taking the time to go through it. And if you don't mind, would you mind putting back that one slide you just had up with some more of those details on there for folks kind of as we wrap up? Yeah, is that okay? And just so folks can get that information. And as Sean mentioned, and we did mention at the top of the hour here, we will be sending out this information, but just in case folks want to kind of write down some of those details, because it really is a great offer. All right, Sean, I would say just if I can ask you just kind of one more thing, if there was some good questions came in, pretty technical presentation today. Are there some other kind of common questions that you come across in your travels or dealing with partners as they're trying to kind of get their sort of arms and head around this new approach here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions, Michael, that we often get is that why is it so easy to manage, but where are all the bells and whistles? Where are all the knobs to turn? How do I tune this environment? How do I tune my storage to a specific need? That's one of the things that with an object storage architecture, it is a pool of storage. So as you look at different applications accessing that cluster for both primary and secondary storage needs, we handle all those things underneath the covers. So as an administrator, as a partner looking and selling value to a customer, a lot of our customers, they don't want to manage storage, right? They just want to provide storage to the applications. And the less time they have to spend managing storage, the better off it is. And so there's oftentimes questions about, well, how do I set up a preferential NFS data store for my VMs, right? And how do I worry about, or do I need to worry about hotspots for my all-flash environment for my virtual servers? And the answer is no. It's because we distribute all those objects across all the drives. So there's no more LUN or volume configuration. Oftentimes you get a question about, for backup recovery, how do you expand that? And the answer is just simply plug in another network connection to the new OneBlocks that you're adding to the cluster. It'll automatically discover the first one, and the pool of storage increases. And then the other common question is, as far as replacing drives that fail, what do I need to do? And the answer is you simply pull it out and you put in a new one. There's zero configuration needed when you're adding storage, when you're removing storage. Most of the things are different in the way that we've all done it in the last 20 plus years in the storage industry, but it is a different way about thinking about solving the problem.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, Sean Darrington, very, very comprehensive presentation today. We really, really appreciate it. We had a great audience, great turnout today, and they stuck with it to the end. So I know you've got a bunch of new converts here. So hopefully you'll be hearing from them with any more questions. Sean, are you all set? Can I wrap things up, or do you have any parting words for us today?
No, thanks everybody for attending today, and please email or reach out with any questions or follow-up. Thank you.